We're learning the second Sikha of Parshas Tetzaveh in Chelek Chof Aleph on page 181. The shir today is being learned with the Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kolpman. The Parsha in unser Sedre von Asiyas Ulavishas Bigdei Kohuna. The section in this week's Torah portion that speaks about the making and the wearing of the garments that for the Kohanim. Verendigt sich mit den Ansag concludes with the following command. V'hoyu al Aaron v'al bonov b'voyem al mayid, and they should be on Aaron or on his children when they enter into the El Mayid, oy begishtom al mizbeach l'sharis b'kodesh, or when they come to the mizbeach to serve in holiness, v'lo yisu avein v'meisu, and they will not have a sin and die. As Rashi maitik the word v'meisu, Rashi brings from the pasuk the word v'meisu in his mefarish and explains. Holamadita. From here we learn that one, a kohen that serves, missing one of the clothing, so he's punishable by death. So the commentaries ask on this Rashi. According to Rashi, we already learned this out from our earlier pasuk where it says V'hoya al Aaron l'sharis, that he should wear the garment when he serves. And the sound of it will be heard when he walks into the Kodesh. This is referring to the Me'il, which had the bells at the bottom of it. Lifnei Hashem, when he comes in front of Hashem, and when he leaves, V'layamis, and he will not die. So there Rashi says, what does V'layamis mean? Miklalav atishmeyahein. From this that it says, what will not happen, we understand what will happen if he's not wearing the garments. Im yiloi lo yischayev miseh. If he's wearing the garments, he's not liable for death. However, if he enters and he's missing one of these garments, he's punishable by death from heaven. So this is a Rashi that seems to be saying that we learn it from that pasuk, and regarding all the garments, that he's chayiv misa. So why are we learning here from this pasuk the exact same din? And Rashi says we're learning from here that if he's missing the garments, then there's a chiv misa. Lulei pirish Rashi beim zweiten pasuk. If not for what Rashi says here, by the second time the Torah repeats this, what we can't learn, and then we would say, as the pasuk chazet desibben noch einmal, the Torah is repeating this again. Nor b'chtei zu meisiv zayin in dem chaymer inyan. It's coming to add and say it a second time, so you should understand how severe of a matter this is. Al derech vi gefind bekamen mekaymes. Similar to what we find in many places, as the Torah chazet iber mer vi einmal demselben isser vas hare laven olav beveis lavin v'chayetze bezeh. The Torah repeats the same isser, the same warning a few times, and sometimes the reason is because here there are two lavin that you're over on just one thing because of its severity. So I could say here the same thing, that the Torah is repeating the same thing because there's two lavin if a kohen does the aveda without the bigdei kohuna. Rashi zakta b'dav b'feidish. However, Rashi clearly says, it's now, here, that we learn, dafke, from the zweiten pasuk, lernt man up den din. It's here in the second pasuk that we learn this din, that he must be wearing all the garments. Isn't it move on? If so, that's not understood. Rashi allein hat schon gesagt. Rashi himself already said earlier, as man lernt this up from the Friedigen pasuk, that we learned this from a earlier pasuk. This is the question that all of the Mefarshei Rashi here discuss. And the Rabbi here is going to bring a few of the answers that they suggest for this. The Ra'am is Masber. The Ra'am explains this as follows. As from Friedigen Pasik, lernt men nor benegeya di shisha begadim welche während der Mond in die Psukim bis dorten. In the first time it says that he should be wearing all the garments when he comes and serves in the Beis HaMikdash. It's referring to 6 of the 8 garments that a Kohen Gadol wears that are already mentioned by name in the beginning when the Torah starts speaking about the mitzvah of making these garments. It mentions 6 of the garments there in the beginning, which are the Choshen, Ephod, Me'il, Ksaynes, Mitznefes, Va'avnet. Aber nit benegeh die 2 begodim, Tzitz und Michnasayim, welche sind früher nicht im Mond. There are still 2 of the garments, the Tzitz and the Michnasayim, that are not mentioned there in the beginning. So therefore, the first time it says it is only referring to 6 of the garments. Und dem din, as wenn se fällt Tzitz auf the Michnasayim, is Mechayev Misa. And now this halacha, to say that this applies to the Tzitz as well, that if you're not wearing it, the Chiv Misa applies. Let it be up from the zweiten pasuk, v'lo yisa avim v'meisu. We learn it from the second time the Torah says this, that you should not have a sin and die. which is written here in the Torah after the Torah commands to make the tzitz and the mechnasayim as well. So therefore it's referring to two different sets of the garments here, therefore it's not a repetition at all. It would seem that if you look at the precise wording of Rashi, we can see that this explanation fits into his words. In Friedigen Pasuk sagt Rashi, Ha im Yikonis mechuser echad min begadim halalu. That if one enters and he's missing one of these clothing, so Rashi emphasizes the word halalu. Mashenkin and then Pasuk over here, though, in the second time, in this Pasuk that we're discussing here, is Dr. Rashi mechuser begadim stam. If you're missing the clothing. And he doesn't specify these. In the earlier pasuk, we only know about those that were already mentioned there. But then when it comes to the second pasuk, is Rashi says him here. Rashi just simply says, "Mishamish mechuser begadim," that if you serve and you're missing one of the clothing, if you're missing any of the 8 garments, then you're chayiv misa. So we can see here in this difference in one word in Rashi that seemingly points to the distinction that the Ra'am makes between the earlier and the pasuk that we're discussing now. Al pizeh, however, if we are to accept this pshat, is of a nitverstandig lider gisa. We could ask him this on the other hand. Wie bald es steht in pasuk der einisch nachdem wir die Teire rechnet ist alle Shmeine begadim. Since the Torah tells us about this, that he must be wearing all the 8 garments and the punishment for not wearing all 8 garments. Zu libivas darf stehen frier, aber zunde as hare benegei de begadim halalu di shisha begadim anal. So why is there a separate mitzvah and a separate warning about one that's not wearing one of the 6 garments, in klal from the Shmeine begadim, which are already included in what the Torah says later on when it repeats it regarding all 8 garments. So the first time when it says in the Torah is still extra. Andere Mefarshim learning an alternative shot here. There's other commentaries that explain as follows. As die beide Psukim reden nicht wegen Stam, wegen alle Bigdei Kohana. Both of these Psukim here are not speaking about just plainly all of the garments that the Kohen wears. Der Tzivi in Eshrim Pasuk bezieht sich nur zum Me'il. The command in the first pasuk is specifically talking about the fact that he must be wearing the me'il, which has the bells on it when he comes in and out. Was wegen ihm is meduba in jenem pasuk and in the psukim shalufnei zedar. That's what that pasuk is speaking about in the prior psukim as well. The zweite azhara, similar, the second azhara is also not speaking about all of the begadim, where it says v'hoya al aram v'al banav goyim v'lo yisu avim v'meisum, is not beneged the mechnasayim. It's speaking specifically about the mechnasayim wegen velachas retzich in friedigen pasuk, of which it speaks of in the very pasuk before this. Und das was Rashi sagt im Loshen, and the fact that Rashi uses in his language the expression hamishamish mechusse begadim stam, that one that serves and he's not he's not wearing any of these garments. And azayach frier, the first time by the me'il, when Rashi says im yikonis mechusse echad min begadim alalu, if he's not wearing one of these garments, and doesn't specify that it's referring to the me'il or to the mechnasayim, is nit kavanasai. Rashi's intention here is not, as das wird abgelernt von die 2 psukim, that the fact that a kohen must be wearing all of the 8 garments when he serves in the Beis HaMikdash is learned from one of these 2 psukim. And here the Rabbi brings that Mefarshim say that that's learned actually from a 3rd pasuk, from a later pasuk. The etzam yalfusa is from a weitendigen pasuk in the parsha. This idea that he has to be wearing all 8 garments is learned from a later pasuk in the next parsha, where it says v'chagarta isim goyme and v'hoisa lehem kohuna l'chok hasaylam. This will be to them as priesthood forever. As dafke durach di begadim, and from there we learn out that it's through these garments that oifketam by the kayanim that inyan kohuna. That's how the kayanim become transformed to be kohuna, to have that level of a kayan. On wie the Gemara learned up from the pasuk, as the Gemara explains that we learn from that pasuk, as bizman shebigdeim aleim kuhunasam aleim. When they're wearing their garments, their priesthood is upon them. Ein bigdeim aleim en kuhunasam aleim. If they're not wearing their garments, then they don't have the kuhuna upon them. V'havaluhu zarim, and they're just like any other plain Jew. Unzar sheshimish b'misa, and therefore, if they serve without the garments, they're chayiv misa, not specifically because they're lacking one of the garments, but because then the priesthood is not upon them, and then they have the halacha like a zar, like any other plain yid that does the aved in the Beis HaMikdash, which is chayiv misa. That's the source for the fact that the Kohen has to be wearing all 8 garments. No, so why does Rashi then, in one of these 2 psukim here, mention regarding all the garments that you have to be wearing all of them, even though the first pasuk speaks just of the miel and the second pasuk only of the mechnesayim? Now, Ribal says, kushta de milsa, since this is the fact and this is the truth, as a mechusser, echad men abegadim is chayiv misa, that if you're missing any of these garments, that the punishment is death, is Rashi mefarish lefia emes. So Rashi puts it in his language this way because this is the truth. But in fact, according to Rashi, there's no repetition here. The first pasuk speaks just of the mi'il, and the second pasuk just of the michnasayim. However, if we are to accept this pshat of the mefarshim, is aber in ganzen net verstandig perish Rashi in the psukim welches pshutte shel mikra. So then it's completely not understood what Rashi here says in his explanation of the psukim, where Rashi is explaining the simple understanding of the pasuk. Noisaf al klala yedua. In addition to the well-known rule, as Rashi verlässt sich nicht auf dem, was steht in a weiteren pasuk, that Rashi, when he says something, does not rely on something that the learner does not see it here in the psukim and will only find out later. So the fact that Rashi uses language here in his Piddish based on what it says later in the Torah is not acceptable. But besides that, let's see what Rashi actually says on that later pasuk, where the Mefarshim here say is really the source for the fact that the Kohen has to be wearing all the begadim all the time. So Aleph, so the first point here is when you look there in the pasuk where it talks about the fact that the Kohen has to have the priesthood upon him all the time. Rashi in ganzen drashos Chazal hanal bisman shebdem alem knosam alem chol. Rashi does not quote what the Gemara says, that it's only if the Kohen wears his garments, then he has the status of a Kohen, he has his priesthood upon him. Rashi teich dort nor. All Rashi says there is that v'hoisalahem, this will be for them, their kohuna. What does this mean? Milui yodayim zet, the fact that they have been tasked with this job, their hands are filled with this job to serve as kohanim, l'kohuna asylum, this is priesthood forever. That's all Rashi says. Und das ist bechlal an inyan welches verbunden mit die shivisimei meluim. This is related to what the psukim speak there about, the 7 days where the kohanim were preparing and training for serving in the Beis HaMikdash. But this is not about the status of kohuna that a kohen gains by wearing the garments, as the Gemara explains it. If so, it's impossible to say, as Rashi verlässt sich da auf dem weitendigen pasuk, that Rashi here, when he mentions that if you're missing any of the garments, then the kohen is chayiv misa, is because he's relying on what you learn from a later pasuk. B'shas as dort is a mefarish b'ifanacher. While there in this pasuk, v'haisalahem kohuna l'chok hasaylam, Rashi has a different interpretation of what that means, not like what it says in the Gemara. Beis, another point over here is, in the Mershten Pirish Rashi Anal, when we look at the first Rashi, where Rashi discusses this, that a Kohen should be wearing the garments all the time when he serves, and Rashi says if he enters missing one of the garments, you could learn, even though this is a big squeeze here in the words of Rashi, as Rashi zaktes lefia emes, even though he's speaking about all garments, but he's not really saying that this is the explanation of the pasuk here. This pasuk only speaks of the me'il. Even though we're not learning this from here. That's in the first Rashi. However, when it comes to what Rashi says on the second pasuk that we're discussing here, Zakt Rashi befedish. Here Rashi clearly says, Ha lamadetachulu, that you learn right here from this pasuk. Adas wird abgelernt von dem pasuk. This is learned from this pasuk here, that if you're missing any of the garments, that you chayiv misa. So how could we say that it's learned from a later pasuk if Rashi clearly says lamadeta, that we learn from the pasuk here? So here the Rabbi yet offers a third suggestion to resolve the redundancy of these 2 Rashis, based on what it says in other Mefarshim. Seemingly we could answer this in a different way, by focusing on another change in the words that there is between the first and second Rashi that discuss this. In Friedigen Pasuk sagt Rashi, in the earlier Pasuk Rashi says, Dem Loshen ha im yikonis uchosa echad min ha-begadim. If the Kohen enters with lacking or missing one of these garments. Und in dem zweiten Pasuk sagt Rashi, if the Kohen serves missing one of these garments. So what's the difference between these two expressions? So the commentary says as follows. As von dem ersten Pasuk wegen dem Meil, in the first Pasuk where it speaks of the Meil, wo the Lashon HaKosav is v'nishma koiloi bevoyei ala kodesh, that the sound of the bells of the Meil are heard when he enters into the kodesh. Lernt men up dem Isser ve'einish von ha'machusa begadim of knisasai l'mikdash bovad. We learn over here about the fact that it's forbidden and the punishment that there is for entering, missing one of the clothing, just by entering. Afile when it is nit ovid aveda dort. Even if when he enters there's no aveda done there. On the pasuk v'lo yisu avim v'meisu, in the second pasuk where it says that you shouldn't have a sin and die by missing one of the garments, and the pasuk right before that says that he may come to the mizbeach to serve, is balalamed. Here it comes to teach as a mishamish mechusa begadim b'misa, that one that serves missing one of these garments is punishable by death. Das heißt, here we learn a new thing about serving, missing one of the garments. So it's two different things that are learned out from two different psukim. There's no redundancy here. Now, you may ask him this. As noch, then as a mechusa begadim is chayiv misa afilav knisa b'vad. Once we know that if a kohen is just missing one of the garments, even when he just enters, so he's already liable for death. So why do you need a separate source to teach that if he serves with missing one of the clothing? The chayiv misa is as soon as he enters, missing one of the clothing. Why add the second idea about him serving without one of the garments? That's irrelevant at this point. So the commentaries explain this in a few different ways. Aleph, one possible explanation is, as the chayiv misa of the knisa from ha'machusa begadim is not b'vayeh la kodesh and oil mayit. The chayiv of misa regarding entry with missing one of these garments is only when you come into the kodesh, into the heichal, into the oil mayit. Aber nit bachutz, not serving outside there. Begishtam al mizbeach, serving, doing the aveda at the mizbeach. Und das is most of the zweite pasuk. And this is what the second pasuk comes in as. Begishtam ala mizbeach l'sharis b'kodesh. When they come to the mizbeach and serve on the mizbeach, there's no entry into the oil mayid, but it's at the mizbeach. As dorten is a nit mechoyev of the knisa v'gisha. So here there's no chiyuv and there's no einish for entering, nor dafke l'sharis. Here the chiyuv misa is because he's serving hamishamish mechusa begadim b'misa, serving missing one of these garments. That's the difference. So it's two different dinim that apply to two different circumstances. There is another possible explanation for the repetition of the psukim, even though once you know that he enters, he's chayiv misa, it's you don't have to make the point that then if he goes and serves, he's chayiv misa. He's already chayiv from before. Das was man can let Rashi upline and dem einish. Fact that you could learn, according to Rashi, this punishment here, heim by yikonis, on heim by meshamish, for both if he enters or if he serves. V'Rashi learned, as we see here in the difference in the language of Rashi, is vile says in dot zwei psukim. That's only because of the redundancy, because there's two psukim here. Is ein pasuk the erste balalamed. So therefore, we have to say that one, if it would only be the first pasuk, so then that teaches im yikanis mechusa chulu. So the first pasuk we say refers to entering, und the zweite hamishamish mechusa begadim, and the second refers to one that serves. Aber wenn es wohl gestanden nur ein pasuk. If there would only be one pasuk about this, as the chiv is nar by hamashamish mechusa begadim. So then we would say that the chiv misa would be only for one that serves missing one of the garments, which is something more severe, not just simply entering, but even serving missing one of the garments. But now that it says two psukim, so the second pasuk reveals the pshat on the first pasuk that it's even including one that just enters without all the garments. So this is another suggestion of the Mefarshim, which fits very well into the difference in the language of Rashi. Once Rashi says Yukonis, and the second time Rashi says Mishamish. Two different points regarding entering or regarding serving, missing one of the garments. Aber, says the Rebbe, Eich der Pirish kemenet annehmen le derech hapshat. However, this explanation as well is not acceptable in the simple understanding of the Psukim. Weil in zweiten Pasuk stehen beide Sachen. Because in the second Pasuk, it actually mentions both details. It says in the pasuk, "B'vayam Eloel Mayid," when you enter into the Oil Mayid, or when you come to the Mizbeach to serve, you should not be missing one of the garments, and then we'll have a sin and die. So clearly from the language of the pasuk just here, and the second time the Torah says you could learn both. Sai of Knisa b'vayim al Mayid, both regarding the entry into the El Mayid, missing one of the garments, and Sai of Mishamish, Mechusa b'gadim, begishtam geimal l'sharis, and also missing one of the garments when you come to serve. So how can we make this distinction that we need both psukim to teach me two different dinim that would not be known and understood from the second pasuk here? The nice of Lazeh, an additional point about this, the Geret Amal Barucha, it was once explained at length, and this is here later in the Sikha and Parshas Kisisa, is al derech hapshat nit given a knisa la'el mayid beheter seidens lipton aveda. According to the pshat of the psukim, even if al pi halacha it's not necessarily so, there was no entry into the el mayid permissibly if it wasn't for the purpose to do an aveda there. Ubemelev, when the pasuk sagt as medaf tragen begadim bevaya la kodesh, if the pasuk says that you must wear all the garments when you enter into the kodesh, meintes bederech hapshat that are reingehen l'sharis b'kodesh. So then, what the intention of the Torah is to say that he should be wearing the garments when he serves, because if you're entering to serve. There is no other purpose of entering. So this brings us back to the original question: Favos darf men zwei limudim hanal. Why do we need the two sources here to teach us that the Kohen should be wearing all of his garments whenever he comes in to serve in the Beis HaMikdash? And the Gam, additionally, the diuk, the precise wording of Rashi that was pointed out before here by the Mefarshim is also very relevant to address. What is the tam von dem Shinei Aloshen and Itzvei Pirushi Rashi? What is the reason for the change in language between the two times Rashi explains this? First time Rashi says, Yukones Mechuser Echad Min Begadim Halalu. So Rashi uses the expression of entering, and Rashi specifically says entering with missing one of these garments. So there's 2 points here. Rashi stresses entering and these, these are the diyukim that the Rebbe pointed out before, one in the Ri'om's pshat and one in the other pshat of the Mefarshim and Siv Dalet. And in the next Rashi says Hameshamish Mechuser Begadim Stam. One that serves and is missing one of these garments, and Rashi does not specify which garments, it refers to all garments, and he says one that serves. So these diyukim are still something that has to be addressed, and as we'll see here, the Rebbe will take the premise that it says here in Mefarshim that there are two different aspects, the entry and the serving, as a basis to explain what the difference between these two Rashis is, but the Rebbe will come to it from a completely different angle, a new original approach, what these two Rashis are saying here. So we'll understand this by first seeing a more general difference in the two explanations of Rashi here on these two psukim. Der Lashon Rashi auf dem zweiten Pasuk Mem Gimel, the language Rashi uses in the second time he explains this in Pasuk Mem Gimel is an imsigna von adin. Rashi is saying it as a halacha. You learn from here that one that serves missing one of the garments is punishable by death. Und sein Pirish auf dem ersten, auf dem friedigen Pasuk Lamed Hey, and when Rashi explains this on the earlier Pasuk in Pasuk Lamed Hey, is besignal shel sipur. Here Rashi says it as a matter of fact, as a story. When one enters missing one of these clothing, and so on. What is the difference between the style of the way Rashi says this? With this we can see what's really the difference here between the two explanations of Rashi. In Pasuk Mem Gimel, here in this Pasuk the Torah specifies V'hoyu al Aaron va'al Bonov, that the garment should be upon Aaron and his children, V'lo yisu avim v'meisu, so he shouldn't have a sin and die. And then the pasuk goes on to say, Chukas olam loy olazare achrav. This is the halacha for him and all of his descendants for the future. So what do we see here in the language of this pasuk? Retzich wegen dem din kloli by alle kohanim. This is the general din regarding wearing the garments that applies to all kohanim equally. Kohen gadol, the kohen hedyet, ubachal adairis. Whatever kohen it is, whether the kohen gadol or a plain kohen, and in all generations, the general din that a kohen must be wearing his garments. That's in the first pasuk. That's why Rashi says it as a din which applies equally to everybody in all times. In the pasuk Lamed Hey, in the first pasuk in pasuk Lamed Hey, there the pasuk says V'hoyo al Aaron l'sharis, that the garments should always be upon Aaron when he serves. Red wegen Aaron Kohen Gadol befrat. Here the Torah is speaking specifically about Aaron HaKohen. Was von dem wat man nicht gewusst benegeya andere Kohenim had yetim. And therefore, if it says here that Aaron should be wearing these garments that are unique and specific for him, we wouldn't know that this halacha applies to all the garments that all Kohenim wear that it speaks about later. There were unique garments that only the Kohen Gadol wore, 4 of them, and the other Kohenim did not wear. So therefore, the previous pasuk is discussing something unique and different, which relates only to certain garments that only the Kohen Gadol wears. Now, so you could ask him this though, this is not at all a complete answer, because as the mechusa begadim from pasuk mem gimel meint nit nor dem chesarim von einem von die dalet begadim and welcher Kohen Gadol und Kohen Hedyot sind gleich. This does not mean to say that in pasuk mem gimel the pasuk is only referring to those 4 garments that both the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedyot equally wear. And it's not including the other garments that only the Kohen Gadol wears. That's not the case. Nor Rashi is mefarish b'tchilas hakasov, or rather, as Rashi clearly says in the beginning of that pasuk, there v'hoyu al Aaron, when it says that these garments should be upon Aaron, that's kol begadim eilal Aaron aruyin loy. That refers to all the garments that are fitting for Aaron as a Kohen Gadol. And then when the pasuk says val bonav, it means ha'amudim b'bahen. It refers to the other 4 garments that the Kohen Hedyot wears. So, if so, the point here is not to say that in the earlier pasuk it's only discussing the big day Kohen Gadol, and in the later pasuk it's discussing the big day Kohen Hedyot. That's not the case. In the later pasuk Mem Gimel, it's discussing all the begadim of all the Kohenim, Kohen Gadol and Kohen Hedyot. So if so, what are we answering here? Weis man doch von dem lechayre dem din euch benegeh die shmeine begadim von Aaron Kohen Gadol. So in the later pasuk we already know this halacha of wearing all the garments, including the all 8 garments which the Kohen Gadol wears. Heinz lieb was davon akram yuchad. So what's the point of the answer here? Why do we need this unique pasuk earlier that talks just about certain garments that Aaron Kohen Gadol wears? Is das kein kashin? But this is not a question. But from friedigem pasuk lernt man up a limud v'din miyuchad. Because when the pasuk speaks about those garments that are unique to the Kohen Gadol, there is a new and special din that's learned out specifically regarding those garments. V'didiik loshen Rashi dort. And here we come back to the precise wording of Rashi, im yikones l'chuser echad min begadim halalu, if the Kohen Gadol enters with one of these garments, so there's a unique halacha that applies here that's different than the general halacha that applies, that's learned out by the later pasuk, where it talks about all the begadim generally that applies to all of the Kohanim equally. Kedlakaman, as will be explained right over here, what exactly are these 2 dinim? There's a din klali. The point here that the Rebbe is saying is there's the din klali that applies to all the begadim, and that's in pasuk mem gimel. And then there's a din miyuchad, a new unique din that applies to certain one of the garments that are mentioned in pasuk lamed hey, and that's by the Kohen in certain begadim that only the Kohen Gadol wears, as we'll see. Now, like in pashtus haloshin yesh loymar, in the simple understanding of the language of Rashi, when Rashi uses this expression of begadim halalu, that in pasuk lamed hey we're addressing only these garments. As midiverte begadim halalu meint Rashi niti ala shisha begadim. The expression of these garments does not refer to all 6 garments which were mentioned earlier in the beginning. Choshen, ephod, neil, mitznefes, ksaynes, va'avnet. Was vert blois der mont frier ubetchilas parsha. It's mentioned once in pasuk dalet all the way in the beginning of the parsha. This is the way that Ra'am learns. But simply, when Rashi says begadim halalu, narblois the gimel begadim, Rashi is referring to 3 of these garments, which are ephod, choshen, and me'il. Vasef prati asiyasam is Moshe don Tetzaveh gevadim. And over here, you see the pasuk elaborates upon them exactly how they should be fashioned and so on, all the details about them. And it's the begadim, that's the begadim halalu that Rashi is pointing out that there's a unique din regarding them, in addition to the general din that applies to all 8 begadim. Now, what's unique about these 3 begadim, which is different from all of the other of the big de kohuna? By die 3 begadim gefindt men im pasuk ha'inyan miyuchad. Specifically regarding these 3 garments, we find something unique in the pasuk. Beim siyam hatzivui of jeden von die 3 begadim, when the Torah finishes the command about how to fashion these garments, is the pasuk meisiv dem teichen von zeir inyan onoiftu. The pasuk concludes with explaining what's their symbolism and what do they accomplish. The Siyam Tetzaveh of Ma'aseh Ephod, by the conclusion of the Torah saying how to make the ephod, it says, "V'samta eshtei ha'avonim al kisvei ephod." You take now the two precious gems and they're placed on the shoulders of this ephod, the shoulder straps. And Avnei Zikaron L'Bnei Yisrael, and these are precious gems that have the names of the Shvatim inscribed in them to bring the memory of the Yidden. V'nasa Aaron Eshmeisam L'Fnei Hashem Oshtek Seif of Zikaron. Aaron carries those gems with the names inscribed upon them in front of Hashem. That's the accomplishment of the ephod. Beim Siyum von Tzivei al Choshen, similar by the conclusion of the details of how to fashion the Choshen, it says in the pasuk, "V'nasa Aaron eshmeis b'nei Yisrael b'Choshen ha'mishpat al libay b'vayel ha'kodesh l'zikaron l'fnei Hashem tamid." So similar also to carry the Choshen, which is on the breast of the Kohen, which has the names of the 12 tribes inscribed on the stones of the Choshen. Another detail, "V'nasa Aaron es mishpat b'nei Yisrael al libay l'fnei Hashem tamid." That the Choshen is called Choshen Mishpat, connected to the union of Mishpat, justice, various different explanations what that means, but another detail where the Torah tells you what the accomplishment of the Choshen is. Besiyim from Parshas HaMe'il. Similar when the Torah concludes speaking about the Me'il, it also says what the point of this is. And it has the bells, and therefore you hear the sound of Aaron coming in and out when he serves in the Kodesh. So what do we see here? This is something unique that we don't find by the other Bigdei Kahuna. Das heißt, der Inyan umuchuven von die begodim, the point and the purpose of specifically these three garments is verbunden mit der Knisa b'vad. It's accomplished by the very fact that the Kohen enters wearing these garments. Mit dem allein, was Aaron kommt lifnei Hashem angetan und hat die begodim tut sich auf by the very fact, even before he does any service, wearing these garments, but just by entering, wearing these garments, having the names of the Yidden inscribed or make the sound of his coming in and out, that already accomplishes something great. Reminding the names of Yidden through the ephod and choshen, that is. Their mishpat b'nei Yisrael al libay al idei choshen, and also the mishpat of Yidden, which is there on his heart. Rashi teiched dem teichen b'mekayim sanal, as Rashi explains more in detail the content of what this represents. Und v'nishma koiloi b'vayel ha'kodesh by mail, and the sound that's heard from the Kohen entering and leaving. So this is specifically these three garments that are unique, that the point of wearing them is the very wearing them, entering with these garments is what the accomplishment here is. And when it comes, however, to the other of the 8 garments, steht nicht bekosov was in Yanim is. In the Torah, it does not specify at all what their symbolism is, what their point is. Nor, rather, all it says is, Nachtem wie steht begnegeh klolos kol begodim. After the Torah, which speaks about all the garments, it says, V'bashta isam es Aaron achicha, that you should dress Aaron, your brother, with them, v'zbanav, his children, itay with him. And you should anoint them. You fill their hands with the work. And sanctify them, and they serve me. Which means that wearing these garments is to fill their hands with the job they'll be doing here. Kiddush and shirus from the Kohanim atzmam. The sanctify and the serving that the Kohanim do here. In other words, these garments are not serving a purpose for what the garments themselves represent when they are in the presence of Lefnei Hashem. As we see that each one of these, the other 3 garments have a special symbolism to them, to the garments themselves. Rather here, it's the fact that the Kohanim are wearing these garments and they become now fitted to be able to do their Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. And then the pasuk then concludes on this and says, "As daf gedemel kenen ze reingehen in ton de Avodah." It's only then when they wear these garments can they enter and do the service. V'hayu al Aaron v'al banov b'vayim el moel moed begishtem al hamizbech l'sharis b'kodesh. This will be upon the Kohanim when they enter and when they serve in holiness. Das heißt, what do you see here regarding 5 of the 8 garments? As in zei farzich is netaken in meyuchad. In the actual garment itself, there is no unique symbolism. Und in Yanim is nor b'chdei the Kohen zal kenem ton de Avodah. The point of these garments is that this is what brings the Kohen to the level of being the Kohen to be able to do the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. That's the 2 different. So we have here 2 different categories of how we define what the garments that the Kohanim wear in the Beis HaMikdash is, and this is actually the distinction here specifically regarding 3 of the 8 garments that the Kohen Gadol wears. 3 of them, the point isn't the actual garment itself and wearing it, so its presence should be Lifnei Hashem. The other 5, the point of it here is the fact that the Kohen now is elevated to the status that he could serve in the Beis HaMikdash. So this explains us now the difference between Pasuk Lamed Hey and what it says afterwards in Pasuk Mem Gimel, the two different dinim that stem from two different points. Und zu dem darf man beide limudim von the psukim. And therefore we have the two sources of the two different psukim for this, that he shouldn't be missing any of the garments. Und the far is the Chelek with Pirish Rashi alein. And therefore we see the specific words in Rashi that are different in the explanation of these two psukim. When it says it, the second time around, when Rashi brings up this idea, Rashi saying that here we're talking about all the garments, and this is the general din regarding all garments, that if you serve missing one of these garments, then there's misa. Because here we're speaking about the fact that what is the point of the garments? That the kohen should be fit to serve. And if he's not fit to serve, then he's chayiv misa. That's the din klali that applies to all garments equally. Aber begodim halalu, then Rashi addresses in the earlier pasuk, in pasuk Lamed Hey, that there are specific three of the garments, di drei begodim, eifot, choshen, and me'il. By zeh is the chiyav misa from a mechusa begodim, nit mitzad the shimish al. Over here, the chiyav misa that there is does not stem from the fact that they're serving in not being fitted to serve because they're not wearing the garments. Nor mitzad the etzem knisa lahechel. Here, the source of the problem is the fact, the very entry into the hechel, not wearing these garments. Then by the knisa felt, eine von the gimel begodim, when you're missing one of these three garments, when you enter, felt the pe'ula v'avayda was the baget tutoif. So here what you're lacking is the very garments themselves have to be worn and brought into the Kodesh for their symbolism, to be there, Lufnei Hashem, to bring the memory of the Yidden and so on. And the far is a mechuyev misa. And that's the source in this case of the chiyav misa. It's a completely different din. So these are two totally different dinim. The din klali that applies to all 8 of the garments of the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol, or 3 of these garments, where by them there's an additional din, miyuchad, a special din that comes from the fact that these garments have to be worn and brought in Lefnei Hashem. Now here the Rebbe addresses that we're discussing the 3 of the garments that have a unique symbolism to them that the Kohen Gadol wears, which is specified in the pasuk. There's a 4th garment though that was unique to the Kohen Gadol, and seemingly in the pasuk it also has a unique content, a unique symbolism, and nevertheless it's not included in this unique halacha that the very entry without them is a chiyav misa. Why is that? And that's the tzitz. So the Rebbe clarifies this here. Even though by the tzitz as well, we find clearly in the Torah when it speaks about, when it finishes speaking about the details of how you make the tzitz. The tzitz is worn on the forehead of Aaron. And this will forgive for different things that happen with tumah regarding kachim. And this brings the Hashem to forgive, and the will of Hashem for the Yidden, to forgive them for the different things that happens in the Aveda. As the Gemara speaks about this. So the point there is, was lefizeh, bashtet zayin pe'ula v'aveda, inim etzim zayin al metzacharen. So it would seem that the tzitz as well should be included in the other 3 garments, in the category of the other 3 garments, where there's something unique about the very fact that you wear them. There's a symbolism in them coming with Hashem. Und von deswegen, but nevertheless, is der Pasuk Kailo der Chiyav Misa beim Mechus Tzitz nit mit die 3 begodim anal. The Torah includes the Chiyav Misa that it says by one that's not wearing the tzitz, not with the other 3 unique garments, the Eifod, Choshen, and Me'il. No, not zusammen mit Klolistigen Din von am Meshamish Mechus Begodim in dem zweiten Pasuk. Rather, it includes it with the general din that applies to all 8 big dikona. Why is that? So the explanation for this is very simple when you look into what Rashi himself says about the tzitz. As Inyan shel tzitz is nit doimet zu Inyanam from the Gimel begodim. The way the tzitz functions and what it accomplishes is not similar to the way it is with the other 3 garments mentioned. Wie Rashi is masbid and pirish from Vart Tomid besteht by tzitz. As Rashi explains the word that it says Tomid, that this is a constant function that there is by the tzitz. What does this mean? Tamid laratza islahem. This will always forgive for Yidden, afila einay al metzchay, even when it's not being worn on the forehead of the kohen. Shalehaya kohen gadol ovid b'yisasha, even if he's not doing the aveda at that time. The Hainu, what this means is, as the pe'ula von him tzitz is nit verbunden mit the knisa. The accomplishment or the effect of the tzitz is not conditioned on the fact that the Kohen Gadol wears it on his forehead and is entering, and even if he's not entering, it doesn't have to be on his forehead in order for it to have the power to bring the leratzis. Now, das ist a pole tmidis, was tut sich auf mitzad dem etzem hatzitz. This is a constant function that the very existence of the tzitz itself accomplishes. So therefore we understand that you can't say regarding the tzitz that the point of wearing the tzitz, entering with the tzitz, is that it has to be on his forehead to enter Lefnei Hashem, similar to the way it is with the other three garments. So therefore the tzitz goes into the category of the other garments, where if you're missing wearing the tzitz, the reason why there's a chiv misa is because the Kohen Gadol or the Kohen is not fit to do his aveda, is being mishamish without the begodim. Those are the two different categories in what Rashi is saying in Pasuk Lamed Hey and in Pasuk Mem Gimel. And so this is based on the point that it said before in the Mefarshim, but as you see here, the Rebbe takes this with a totally different twist, that there are two different categories within the Big Day Kahuna. All of them, there's one din, a din klali, and some of them, three of them, you have this unique din where the Isser and the Chiv Misa stems from the very Knisa that it has to be there, Lefnei Hashem. According to this comes out a novel idea according to Rashi. As in dem dim from Mechusa begadim is faran achilik zwischen die beide suge begadim. That when it comes to the case of a person, a kohen, not wearing any of the garments, there's a difference between the two categories of garments that we're discussing. Then a kohen gadol geht herein in hechel Mechusa begadim. If the kohen gadol enters and he's missing one of the garments, unit tu in the kein aveda, and he didn't yet do any aveda, is a reis von hechel, and he immediately left the hechel. Is an afgeminnet, sie es fällt eine von die drei begadim, oder von die andere chamish begadim. So there's a difference if what he was missing was one of these three garments that we discussed that are unique, or any of the other five garments. Fällt eine von die andere chamish begadim. If he's only missing one of the other five garments, is nitok in chiv misa. Just by entering and then immediately leaving, there is no chiv misa, weil hat shamish given, because he didn't serve missing one of the garments. Aber wenn es fällt bei ihm eine von die begadim halalu, if he's missing one of these garments, the chayshan ephod or me'il is chayiv misa b'dei shemayim. Just by entering without one of them, there's a chayiv misa. Oich when hat nit mishamish given, even if he didn't serve. Ukepashtos loshen Rashi, and this is the simple meaning of the words of Rashi. Im yukones muchusa echad min begadim halalu chayiv misa. That if he's missing one of these garments, which are unique, and the point of these garments is not to make the kohen fit to serve, but rather it's the symbolism in the very garments themselves. If you're not wearing it when you enter, just entering into the Beis HaMikdash, you chayiv misa. Those are the two dinim that we see here clearly specified in the precise wording of Rashi. Now we could say what we can take out from this Rashi, from the wine, from the deeper understanding of what Rashi is saying here. The 2 points explained there regarding the Aveda that the Kohen Gadol does, that wears all 8 garments. Aleph, sein Knisa leKodesh, the very entry into Kodesh, was is verbunden mit drei begadim, which is related to 3 of the garments, Choshen, Ephod, Me'il. Beis, sein Aveda beKodesh, mit alle Shmeine begadim, the service that he does with all 8 garments. Seinen Behesem zu die 2 Jahren, was wären durch dem aufgetan bei Jeden. It's corresponding to the 2 different things that are accomplished by the Kohen Gadol for or on behalf of the Yidden. The Reiftu von Avedas Kohen Gadol and Azay alle Kohenim in the Beis HaMikdash, the accomplishment of the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol and also by all the Kohenim, was tut als Shliach, oder Vorsteher, Ba'koyach von Klal Yisrael, and the Aveda that the Kohen Gadol does is either as a Shliach, or even if you can't give him that definition as a Shliach, but at least as a representative of all of Klal Yisrael, is zu verbinden durch seine Aveda b'Kodesh Lefnei Hashem alle Yidden mit dem Neibischen. It's to connect all Yidden through the Aveda of the Kohen or Kohen Gadol in front of Hashem, to connect all Yidden to Hashem. And then Verbund von Yidden mit dem Neibischen is auf 2 Fanen. Now the connection of Yidden to Hashem, so there are 2 levels to this, or 2 layers to this. Aleph, one is wie Yidden verbinden sich mit dem Neibischen durch Aveda b'Poel. It's when Yidden connect to Hashem through what they actually do, how they actually serve. They express their connection through something specific. Durch their Aveda b'Teire mitzvahs, by learning or doing mitzvahs. U'kemay mer Azal, as Chazal tell us regarding Yidden, ani nivreisi l'shamish as kaini. That I, a Jew, is created to serve his master. That's one point. Beis v'Yidden mitzad zeir etzem mitzias. Then there's the very existence of the Jew. Zenim Banov oder Avodah von Eibishten, are the children or the servants of Hashem even before they do anything. Noch Eider, ze fieren durch Tafkidim Ba'olam, before they even fulfill their mission in this world. This was once explained at length in a Sikha in Parshas Kisava in Chelek of Dalid. Der Tam, for was Yidden werden zugeglichen zu an Oster Chaviv. Rashi there says Yidden are compared to a beloved treasure. Kliyakar vavonim toivis sham malachim goinzim maisam. Precious antique vessels or precious gems that kings hide and have for them privately. What is the meaning of this mashal? Punkt v'di oitzris hagenuzim shel hamelech. Just like these hidden treasures of the king, is in Yanim v'tachlisam nitoy zu durchführen mit zei, a bestimmten tafkid in Yoni HaMelucha. The point there and the purpose of these hidden treasures is not that they serve any specific purpose in any specific area of the kingdom. Zei mitzias is nor bichdei di melech soll sich mit zei mishtasheh sein. Haben von zei teinig. Rather, their very existence is tied very deeply to the king himself. They express who the king is and his pleasure that he has with them. Similar, that's what the mashal is expressing regarding the existence of Yidden, as the etzem mitzias von a Yidden, the very existence of a Jew, hecher euch von der Tachlis, was durch sei, wird direleis barach betachtain. This is even greater and higher than the purpose of what a Yid fulfills in this world by creating a dwelling for Hashem here in the world below, by fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs in this world. Der Eibishter is sich mishtasheh mit Yidden. Hashem takes pleasure, and his pleasure, his depth of who Hashem himself is expressed in the very existence of a Yid. Those are the two levels of connection that there is in the existence of a Yid, in who they are and in what they do. So this is the two different points here, the two different levels in what the Kohen Gadol does in his service in the Beis HaMikdash. Frier kommt sein Knisa l'Kodesh. First, there's the very entry to come into the Kodesh. But das is meramis of the Knisa areinkom von alle Yidden. This is the entry of all of Klal Yisrael, and wenn es shlichus v'chulu gate arein, on whom's behalf the Kohen or Kohen Gadol is entering. Ela Kodesh, and anayfim from the Zikaron of Hashem, bringing the memory of all of Yidden in front of Hashem. Darauf too is nit verbunden mit der Avodah von Kohen Gadol b'Kodesh. The accomplishment here is not that he's entering as a introduction in order to serve. No, but it's the very entry itself. Nor the etzem knisa el hakodesh poilt dem zikaron von Yidden. Wie sie sehen mitzad ze etzem mitzias banav avodah von Havaya. The very entry itself represents reminding and bringing the Yidden into the Beis HaMikdash for who they are, children or servants of Hashem. Noch eide ze fieren durch zeir avodah, before they accomplish anything. When erst danach hebt sich an die avodah von Kohen Gadol. Then comes the second stage, which is expressing something different. The actual service of the Kohen Gadol, as mishamish b'kodesh, he serves. Was das ist verbunden mit der Avodah von Yidden, l'shamish is koini. This is how a Yid serves and expresses his connection to Hashem through something that he does, the mission that he accomplished in this world, Torah and mitzvahs. Those are the two levels of what the Kohen Gadol accomplishes in connecting Yidden to the Eibishter. Now, coming back here, though, to the garments that the Kohen Gadol wears, so there are the three unique garments that stand out and are different from all the other, from the 8 garments. With this we can understand what's the unique connection to that first stage, the very entry of the essence of the existence of a Yid into the Kodesh, with specifically these 3 garments of Chesed, Ephod, and Me'il. Weil indeed the Godim and Merum is the Yidden leid sehr verschiedene Sugim v'dargis. Because over here, this encompasses all of Klal Yisrael that are divided in these 3 categories. Both on the Chesed and Ephod you have engraved the names of all of Yidden through the Shvatim. This refers to Yidden that are on a higher level. You can see clearly who they are, what they represent. You look at this Yid, you see his Yiddishkeit in him, and it's engraved in him. That's what these names represent. There are 2 levels of these Yidden that are engraved in the names of the Shvatim, in the Chesed, and then in the shoulder straps of the Ephod. Chesed, was mekayme is al varing, the Chesed which is placed on the heart of Varing. The Madrege von Yidden was some in ganzen mahapach gewen, the middes von Nefesh Bahamas lekedusha, referring to Yidden that are on the level where in their heart there is the right and left ventricles of the heart, which has the Tetzaveh and Yetzirah, or Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamis, and he's completely and totally transformed anything that's negative to be positive, to be good, and therefore right there on the heart is engraved the names of these Yidden. That's one level of a Yid. On Ephod, was die Avonim sind al Kisvei Ephod. Now the Ephod has the names engraved and they are placed on the shoulder straps. Nit melofonav alev vidachoshen, and it's not placed right there in the front of him on the heart, rather on the straps on the shoulders. Is das Merabes of the Yidden was halten noch bei der Avodah von Iskafia, was ist Prinnes Acharayim. These are Yidden that are serving the Eivishter, but are still struggling and are fighting and have to break the evil that is coming to attack them. And this is therefore engraved on the shoulder straps, which is still sort of behind the Kohen Gadol. Those are the two levels of Yidden hinted in the Choshen and the Ephod. Und der Me'il is verbunden mit dem Madreges HaTachtonis für Yidden. The Me'il represents Yidden that are on the lowest level. These are people, that Yidden, that are not on a level where they have any feeling, any deeper Aveda on any level, but they're just there doing in their actual behavior in Maisa B'Poil, doing what they should be. The Geret Amal Barucha, it was once explained where you see this hinted, that these are the Yidden that are hinted in the Me'il. And them time was B'shulei HaMe'il is on a given remaining. Why is it that at the bottom of the Me'il there were pomegranates? Was es in the Meramis of the Yidden was in them Darge von remaining. It refers, it's hinting to those Yidden that are on the level of pomegranates. As the Gemara Dashins Kapela Charimin Rakosech that we learn from this pasuk, Rekonim Shabach, even the Yidden amongst you that seem to be just simple and empty people, Malaya mitzvahs kerimai. However, they are filled with mitzvahs like the pomegranate is filled with the pomegranate seeds. So this refers to the simple Yidden that just do Maisa mitzvahs. Und b'shas the Kohen Gadol geht rein mit alle Sugim von Yidden. When the Kohen Gadol enters and he brings the memory and he brings along with him all of Klal Yisrael that are included in all these three categories, that there's a Karon Lefnei Hashem Kanach. This brings the memory of Klal Yisrael by the very entry, the very essence of who Yidden are. Und if them sagt man, it's regarding this, that there's one halacha, unique halacha, that im Yikonis Mechusa Echad Min Habegadim Halalu Chayiv Misa. That if you enter and you're missing one of these garments, then you Chayiv Misa. Here the Rebbe points out another diik of the Rashi, Echad Min Habegadim, which does not say in the later Rashi. Kedei Tzo'evtan, dem Zikaron Lefnei Hashem from Bnei Yisrael, in order to accomplish, to bring the memory of Yidden in front of Hashem, Muzman haben alle Sugim von Yidden. Rashi emphasizes here that you have to have every single one of all of these categories of Yidden. When it's felt by the Knisa, ein Sug von Yidden, if you're just missing even just one category, felt the Pa'ula from the Knisa. So you don't have the accomplishment of the entry, or a little bit different, other in their Pa'ula from the Knisa. You are lacking in what you're trying to accomplish here with this entry. That's one point regarding the entry with all these three garments that encompass all of Klal Yisrael. And that is, weil diese Karin, wo es Achtus von Yidden mit Neibestehen is nicht auch keines Chalkes. Because in order to bring the memory and the union, to unify all Yidden together, over here, there are no levels, there are no divisions, wearing all three garments which represent all different Yidden on every level that there can be, that unites all Yidden as one. Sie nimmt alle Yidden ke'echad. On this level, the very essence of the Jew, not his function, not his job, not his mission in the world, but his very existence, over here, every single Jew is one and the same. And therefore, when you single out one Jew and you say he does not enter, so then you're missing the whole thing. You're not just missing 1% or one Jew, you're missing the entire thing is not there. Because all Yidden are here as one. In the Ha'ara, the Rebbe explains that if we're speaking about all Yidden that are on the level that they're all one mamish, so why in these three garments are they divided into three different categories? There's significance to that as well, as explained in the Ha'ara here. Okay, from here the Rebbe takes out a very important and powerful lesson when it comes to being Mekarev and talking to another Jew to bring him back to his true Jewish identity and to Torah mitzvahs. Das tav zayna hirav hayeden rav. This should be a lesson to every Rav, Meire Derech, any person that has influence in guiding, for anybody. That can have any influence in the surroundings. When you encounter a Jew, in whatever situation he may be, the first thing that you have to touch him with is, and trigger in him is, the remembrance, to remember who he is. Was and emes mitzias is, to just remind them of his true identity. Remind him about the soul that he has, which is a piece of Hashem, literally. And you have to also explain to him what that means. And what that means is that his neshama comes from the depths of who Hashem is on the deepest level, meaning that every Jew is connected to the pneumius, of the innermost essence of who Hashem is. That's the very existence of the Jew, and this is the first thing of what you have to reveal to a Jew that you meet that's not aware of this. And when that's accomplished, once that clicks in him, once you've brought that out from him, so now he feels like, I'm on the inside. I'm not an outsider anymore. He's not looking from the outside in, that these are people that maybe I do belong to them, no I don't. He feels and realizes, this is me. And I'm connected to the deepest place with all Yidden, with Hashem. That's the first step. And how is this accomplished? This is accomplished by the Kohen Gadol within every generation. By connecting this Yid that you encounter to tzadikim and the Talmidei Chachamim of the generation, was durch them is keilu nidbak b'shchina mamish. Through this, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya Perik Beis, you connect them to Hashem, literally to the Shechina. Ki al yidei dveikim b'Talmidei Chachamim, by connecting them to the Talmidei Chachamim, kshurais nefesh ruach u'neshama shel amei haaretz. This connects various different levels of the neshama of even the simplest Jew, and this connects and opens up the neshama of the simplest Jew to their very deep source lamaila in the Chachma of Hashem. But this is negeya tza'al sugiyidin, which this is relevant. What the Alter Rebbe says here is speaking about every and any Jew that there may be. That's the first step. In simple words, the first step when you connect a Yid to Yiddishkeit and reveal his soul is connect him to the Rebbe, that will open up his soul and realize who he is. Then later comes Hoitman on to Tomitim in Avedis and Madreges Pratiyas Shalai. Then you could start influencing him and teaching him and dealing with him on his individual level, including also the atonement of certain things in his lifestyle that are not supposed to be in the life of a Yid, to remove unwanted things, external things that have stuck to him. This is not his true identity at all, which includes the Hiris B'Sur Mirah, to be careful of things that you're supposed to stay away from, and Esafa B'Vasei type, and adding and increasing in mitzvahs and things in the positive. That's the approach of how you bring a Yid closer to Hashem. As it is with the Kohen Gadol entering into the Beis HaMikdash, first the very entry of all of Klal Yisrael, and only afterwards the service, the expression of what you do in the Beis HaMikdash. Through this spiritual Aveda that everybody and anybody can do in any time period of wearing the Bigdei Kain is Mezeichet to Malbisham Lasad Lavei. We will be Zeichet to the fulfillment of the Nevuah, or the expression. The Gemara says that the Kain will wear these garments again in the future when Mashiach comes. Was Aaron, Ubanov, Moshe, Imaim, and Aaron and his children, and Moshe will be there with them in the Beis HaMikdash Ashlishi, in the third Beis HaMikdash.